Three things, then, would decompose in analysis this single thing, spirit or spectre, or king. For the king occupies this place, here the place of the father, whether he keeps it, takes it, or usurps it, and beyond the return of the rhyme. For example, the play's the thing, wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. King is a thing is the king, precisely where he separates from his body, which, however, does not leave him. Contract of secession, necessary pact in order to have more than one body, that is, in order to reign, and first of all, to inherit royal dignity, whether by crime or election. The body is with the king, but the king is not with the body. The king is a thing. What then are these three things of the thing? 1. First of all, mourning. We will be speaking of nothing else. It consists always in attempting to ontologize remains, to make them present, in the first place by identifying the bodily remains and by localizing the dead. All ontologization, all semanticization, philosophical, hermeneutical, or psychoanalytical, finds itself caught up in this work of mourning, but, as such, it does not yet think it. We are posing here the question of the spectre to the spectre, whether it be Hamlet's or Marx's. On the near side of such thinking, one has to know. One has to know it. One has to have knowledge. Il faut le savoir. Now, to know is to know who and where, to know whose body it really is and what place it occupies. For it must stay in its place, in a safe place. Hamlet does not ask merely to whom the skull belonged. Whose was it? The question that Valéry quotes. He demands to know whom the grave belongs to. Whose grave's this, sir? Nothing could be worse, for the work of mourning, than confusion or doubt. One has to know who is buried where, and it is necessary to know, to make certain, that in what remains of him, he remain there. Let him stay there, and move no more. 2. Next, one cannot speak of generations of skulls or spirits. Kant, qui genuit Hegel, qui genuit Marx, except on the condition of language, and the voice, in any case of that which marks the name or takes its place. Hamlet, that skull had a tongue in it, and could sing once. 3. Finally, Marx, qui genuit Valéry, the thing works, whether it transforms or transforms itself, poses or decomposes itself. The spirit of the spirit, is work. But what is work? What is its concept if it supposes the spirit of the spirit? Valéry underscores it. By spirit here, I mean a certain power of transformation. The spirit works. So, whither Marxism? That is the question the title of this colloquium would ask us. In what way would it be signaling toward Hamlet and Denmark and England? Why does it whisper to us to follow a ghost? Where? Whither? What does it mean to follow a ghost? And what if this came down to being followed by it? Always, persecuted perhaps by the very chase we are leading. Here again what seems to be out front, the future, comes back in advance. From the past, from the back. Something is rotten in the state of Denmark, declares Marcellus, at the point at which Hamlet is preparing precisely to follow the ghost. I'll follow thee. Act 1, Scene 4. And he too will soon ask him, whither? Where wilt thou lead me? Speak, I'll go no further. Ghost, mark me, I am thy father's spirit. Repetition and first time. This is perhaps the question of the event as question of the ghost. What is a ghost? What is the effectivity of the presence of a spectre? That is, of what seems to remain as ineffective, virtual, insubstantial as a simulacrum. Is there between the thing itself and its simulacrum? an opposition that holds up. Repetition and first time, but also repetition and last time, since the singularity of any first time makes of it also a last time. Each time it is the event itself. A first time is a last time. Altogether other. Staging for the end of history. Let us call it a hauntology. This logic of haunting would not be merely larger and more powerful than an ontology, or a thinking of being, of the to be, assuming that it is a matter of being in the to be or not to be, but nothing is less certain. It would harbour within itself, but like circumscribed places or particular effects, eschatology and teleology themselves. It would comprehend them, but incomprehensibly. How to comprehend, in fact, the discourse of the end, or the discourse about the end? Can the extremity of the extreme ever be comprehended? And the opposition between to be and not to be? Hamlet already began with the expected return of the dead king. After the end of history, the spirit comes by coming back. Revenons. It figures both a dead man who comes back and a ghost whose expected return repeats itself again and again. Oh, Marx's love for Shakespeare. It is well known. Chris Haney shared the same passion. I have just learned this, and I like the idea. Even though Marx more often quotes Timon of Athens, the manifesto seems to evoke, or convoke, right from the start, the first coming of the silent ghost, the apparition of the spirit that does not answer, on those ramparts of Elsinore, which is then the old Europe. For if this first theatrical apparition already marked a repetition, it implicated political power in the folds of this iteration. In the same figure, like the king that's dead, says Bernardo, as soon as he thinks he recognizes the thing in his irrepressible desire for identification. From what could be called the other, from the other scene, from the eve of the play, the witnesses of history fear and hope for a return. Then, again and again, a coming and going. Marcellus, what, has this thing appeared again tonight? Then, enter the ghost, exit the ghost, enter the ghost, as before. The question of repetition, the spectre is always a revenant. One cannot control its comings and goings because it begins by coming back. Think as well of Macbeth, and remember the spectre of Caesar. After having expired, he returns. Brutus also says, again, well, then I shall see thee again. Ghost. I, at Philippi. Act 4, Scene 2. Now, one may very well wish to take a breath, or let out a sigh, after the expiration itself, for it is a matter of the spirit. What seems almost impossible is to speak always of the spectre, to speak to the spectre, to speak with it, therefore especially to make or let a spirit speak. And the thing seems even more difficult for a reader, an expert, a professor, an interpreter, in short for what Marcellus calls a scholar, perhaps for a spectator in general. Finally, the last one to whom a spectre can appear, address itself, or pay attention is a spectator as such, at the theatre or at school. The reasons for this are essential. As theoreticians or witnesses, spectators, observers, and intellectuals, scholars believe that looking is sufficient. Therefore, they are not always in the most competent position to do what is necessary: speak to the spectre. Herein lies, perhaps, among so many others, an indelible lesson of Marxism. There has never been a scholar capable of speaking of anything and everything while addressing himself to everyone and anyone, and especially to ghosts. There has never been a scholar who really, and as scholar, deals with ghosts. A traditional scholar does not believe in ghosts, nor in all that could be called the virtual space of spectrality. There has never been a scholar who, as such, does not believe in the sharp distinction between the real and the unreal, the actual and the inactual, the living and the non-living, being and non-being, to be or not to be, in the conventional reading. in the opposition between what is present and what is not, for example, in the form of objectivity. Beyond this opposition, there is, for the scholar, only the hypothesis of a school of thought, theatrical fiction, literature, and speculation. If we were to refer uniquely to this traditional figure of the scholar, we would therefore have to be wary here of what we could define as the illusion, the mystification, or the complex of Marcellus. The latter was perhaps not in a situation to understand that a classical scholar would not be able to speak to the ghost. Marcellus did not know what the singularity of a position is. Let's not call it a class position, as one used to say long ago, but the singularity of a place of speech, of a place of experience, and of a link of filiation, places and links from which alone one may address oneself to the ghost. Thou art a scholar, speak to it, Horatio, he says naively, as if he were taking part in a colloquium. He appeals to the scholar, or to the learned individual, to the man of culture as a spectator who better understands how to establish the necessary distance, or how to find the appropriate words for observing, better yet, for apostrophizing the ghost, which is to say also for speaking the language of kings, or of the dead. For Bernardo has just spied the face of the dead king. He thinks he has identified it through its likeness. Bernardo, in the same figure, like the king that's dead. Marcellus, thou art a scholar, speak to it, Horatio. He does not ask him merely to speak to the ghost, but to call it, interpolate it, interrogate it. More precisely, to question the thing that it still is. Question it, Horatio. And Horatio enjoins the thing to speak. He orders it to do so twice in a gesture that is at once imperious and accusing. He orders, he summons at the same time as he conjures. By heaven, I charge thee, speak, 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 I charge thee, speak. And in French, in fact, I charge thee is often translated by je t'en conjure, which indicates a path where later we will see injunction crossing with conjuration. By charging, or conjuring him to speak, Horatio wants to inspect, stabilize, arrest the spectre in its speech, for which, they say, you spirits oft walk in death. Speak of it, stay and speak. Stop it, Marcellus. Inversely, Marcellus was perhaps anticipating the coming, one day, one night, several centuries later, of another scholar. The later would finally be capable, beyond the opposition between presence and non-presence, actuality and inactuality, life and non-life, of thinking the possibility of the spectre as possibility. Better, or worse, he would know how to address himself to spirits. He would know that such an address is not only already possible, but that it will have at all times conditioned as such address in general. In any case, here is someone mad enough to hope to unlock the possibility of such an address. It was thus a fault on my part to have put so far out of memory what was the most manifest thing about the manifesto. What manifests itself in the first place is a spectre, this first paternal character, as powerful as it is unreal. A hallucination or a simulacrum that is virtually more active than what is so blithely called a living presence. Upon rereading the manifesto and a few other great works of Marx, I said to myself that I know a few texts in the philosophical tradition, perhaps none, whose lessons seem more urgent today, provided that one take into account what Marx and Engels themselves say. For example, in Engels' preface to the 1888 re-edition, about their own possible aging and their intrinsically irreducible historicity. What other thinker has ever issued a similar warning in such an explicit fashion? Who has ever called for the transformation to come of his own theses, not only in view of some progressive enrichment of knowledge, which would change nothing in the order of a system, but so as to take into account there, another account, the effects of rupture and restructuration, and so as to incorporate in advance, beyond any possible programming, the unpredictability of new knowledge, new techniques, and new political givens. No text in the tradition seems as lucid concerning the way in which the political is becoming worldwide, concerning the irreducibility of the technical and the media in the current of the most thinking thought. And this goes beyond the railroad and the newspapers of the time, whose powers were analyzed in such an incomparable way in the Manifesto. And few texts have shed so much light on law, international law, and nationalism. It will always be a fault not to read and reread and discuss Marx, which is to say also a few others, and to go beyond scholarly reading or discussion. It will be more and more a fault, a failing of theoretical, philosophical, political responsibility, when the dogma machine and the Marxist ideological apparatuses, states, parties, cells, unions, and other places of doctrinal production, are in the process of disappearing. We no longer have any excuse, only alibis, for turning away from this responsibility. There will be no future without this. Not without Marx, no future without Marx, without the memory and the inheritance of Marx. In any case, of a certain Marx, of his genius, of at least one of his spirits. For this will be our hypothesis, or rather our bias. There is more than one of them. There must be more than one of them.